friends, and welcome to another stupendous installment from very high above all the low-grade buffoons in the Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Monday. First, I have to apologize for the lateness of today's episode. I was doing an interview with Democrat Representative Trey Sherwood. It's a fascinating conversation. You're going to love it, and I'm going to play it for you on Wednesday's installment of the podcast. As you might have surmised, she and I have some pretty serious disagreements. But the whole point of doing the interview is to show you, and everybody else for that matter, that you can have a conversation with somebody with whom you completely disagree and still maintain a pleasant conversation. Just because we disagree doesn't mean that we have to do it antagonistically. So anyway, that's going to be on Wednesday's show. But I want to begin this morning with a little bit of a praise. Tomorrow, it will be 8 years that I, your illustrious host, have been sober as a district judge in Wyoming. No, wait a minute. I have been way more sober than that. And I have to tell you, it's the best decision I've ever made. But there again, my choices were pretty slim. It was either quit drinking or die. Obviously, I chose the former. And I have to tell you, to be completely and brutally honest, like any seasoned athlete, I retired at the top of my game, or at the rock bottom of it, as it were. And I have God and my family to thank for it. Now, I don't tell you this to be boastful or brag about how long it's been since I've had a beer. Well, now I drink a lot of fake beers, but there's a big difference between those two. But I'm telling you this to hopefully encourage somebody else who may be struggling with alcohol or drugs. If I can do it, being the drunk that I was, then you can too. And if you need a little encouragement, I've set up a new email address for the show. It's pretty simple. It's theshow@cowboystatepolitics.com. Go ahead and shoot me an email, and I'd be glad to visit with you. The left in America is engaged in what I would call frenetic desperation. The Trump administration is dismantling their agenda at a pace that none of them could have ever anticipated. I'm sure from their perspective, it feels as though with each passing day of Trump's second term, more and more bricks of the walls that they constructed around Trump's presidency are falling in amongst their ears. And rightfully so. They didn't hardly do any of it through Congress. It was all through executive order. And one of those is this absolutely stupid green agenda that all of them seem to be so dedicated to. There's two different agendas going on here. They're both green, but for different reasons. The first one is these wackos that actually think that we are destroying the planet's atmosphere and that we arrogantly can do something about it, even if we were destroying it. We're not. And there's no evidence to suggest that we are. Actually, all of the evidence points in the opposite direction, that we're not destroying the atmosphere and that the Earth does a really good job of taking care of itself. These tree-hugging morons that actually believe in climate change really are the useful idiots in the whole equation. They are the folks that spend their days, day in and day out, trying to convince you that there's something wrong with the climate, and more idiotically, that you can do something about it. The other agenda that's going on here is the other type of green that all of us are really big fans of. Yeah, stacks of Ben Franklins. There is a tremendous amount of money that goes into all of these ridiculous climate schemes. One of the big ones that we're seeing right now in Wyoming are all these dumb windmills. The truth is, those windmills will never pay for themselves. They will not generate enough electricity to overcome the costs associated with erecting them. And they are only profitable through government subsidies. But that's just one of the left's ridiculous Rube Goldberg machines. Another one is this half-witted idea of carbon capture and sequestration, that we're going to grab all of the carbon dioxide off of coal-fired power plants or just generally from the open air, and then we're going to pump it into the ground and store it. But it's like I always tell you, my friends, don't ever accept the premise. The premise behind this carbon capture and sequestration scheme is that carbon dioxide is actually a bad thing. Do you know what happens to a plant if you starve it of carbon dioxide, which, by the way, is virtually impossible in Earth's atmosphere? But let's just say that you could starve a plant of carbon dioxide. You know what would happen? It would die. Carbon dioxide is plant food, and if you're really interested in carbon capture and sequestration, you should really plant more trees. The largest carbon capture operation on planet Earth is called a forest. Just using rough and back-of-the-envelope type of numbers, if each full-grown tree uses approximately 40 pounds of carbon every single year, and that's pretty much the average, according to a number of sources that I've looked up on the internet. Not saying that everything on the internet is true, but it seems that they pretty much agree on this whole 40 pounds of carbon thing. But anyway, if you do all the calculations, and again, just using rough numbers, and every tree takes care of 40 pounds of CO2, and you try to estimate how many trees are in the Bighorn National Forest, and then you figure out the average CO2 production of each American household, you'll find out that the Bighorn National Forest, all by itself, will consume enough CO2 to cover all that is produced by 10 million American households. And as far as plant life goes, you know, the things that consume CO2, the Bighorn National Forest doesn't even hold a candle to a rainforest, even one that is actually kind of small. So anyway, don't accept the premise of this carbon capture racket. You don't have to be a scientist to disprove it. You just have to think logically. So it kind of makes me laugh when I see articles that pop up like the one that did in Wildpile over the weekend entitled, Trump Cancels $49 million Wyoming Coal Carbon Capture Project. State lawmakers will also consider repealing a controversial coal carbon capture mandate, citing costs to ratepayers. It just so happens that I still have the soundbite from one of the bill's co-sponsors that pretty much tells you that not even he believes in this whole carbon capture nonsense. I'm going to play it for you in just a little bit, and trust me, there's a ton of stuff in there to digest. I mean, basically, it tells you that all of this is a bunch of bullcrap. And really, it doesn't have anything to do with the environment. It's all about the other green agenda. And just take a wild guess at whose green they were all interested in back in 2022. From Wildpile, and I quote, both the Trump administration and Wyoming lawmakers appeal to be losing enthusiasm for advancing research and seeding commercial-scale carbon capture at existing coal-fired power plants, a key component of Go Green Governor Mark Gordon's coal-inclusive, in big, gigantic quotation marks, decarbonizing energy strategy. The U.S. Department of Energy in May canceled some $3.7 billion. That's billion with a B, in federal grants that supposedly were to support clean energy demonstration projects across the nation, including $49 million for a large-scale carbon capture pilot project at the Dry Fork Station coal-fired power plant north of Gillette. $49 million for just one of these things. Also in May, the Wyoming Legislature's Joint Minerals Business and Economic Development Committee decided to look into repealing the state's controversial coal carbon capture mandate, House Bill 200, Reliable and Dispatchable Low Carbon Energy Standards, which was passed in 2020. Now, unbeknownst to Wildpile, evidently, is there was another carbon capture bill that was passed in 2022. But never mind, they never do the research anyway. Gordon has hailed the mandate, also known as the Low Carbon Energy Standards, as an important tool in his, quote, best of all of the above energy strategy. I'll get back to that in just a second, as well as his, quote, Decarbonizing the West initiative, which touts the importance of keeping coal-burning power plants open for retrofitting them with carbon capture technologies, end quote. Now just listen to this phrase for just a second and then tell me what you think. Quote, best of all of the above energy strategy. There's a mouthful. Let me tell you what it really means. All of the above is a signal, virtue signal if you prefer that term, that politicians use to say that they're not in favor of picking winners and losers. They want all sources of whatever it is that they're talking about. But in true politician form, that phrase is usually followed up by some sort of qualifier. They'll say, I'm in favor of an all-of-the-above strategy. However, and here comes the qualifier that gets them out of any sort of rhetorical culpability with regard to their past statements. However, we want to do, whatever it is, responsibly. That way, they can easily claim that whatever part of that all-of-the-above strategy that they don't like is irresponsible, and thus we shouldn't do it. More political bullcrap. So when Governor Gordon says the best of the all of the above, it's the same thing. Guess who gets to choose the best of said all of the above strategy? Governor Gordon. So anything that he considers not to be the best of said strategy, he doesn't have to do, and nobody can hold him accountable for any of the wrong choices he's probably going to make because he said he wanted to choose the best. And being the lifelong radical leftist that Governor Gordon has always been, guess which option is going to end up being the best of said all of the above strategy? It's not going to be involving coal or petroleum. He's already said that.
It is clear that we have a warming climate. It is clear that carbon dioxide is a major contributor to that challenge. There is an urgency to addressing this issue. And it isn't going to be solved only by turning off fossil fuels.
It's not going to be solved only by turning off fossil fuels, which means that his solution does include turning off those extractable minerals. And when I pointed out that the first time, he called me crazy. Oh, that crazy David Iverson. It doesn't mean that. Sure it doesn't. Except, of course, that he's already said that, too, in a 1998 article in High Country News that clearly said he's been fighting his whole life against fossil fuel production in the Powder River Basin. And, if you don't believe me, here's another one from that same article in Wildpile from Governor Gordon, and I quote, "It is important that we acknowledge that if the concern is about CO2 emissions in our atmosphere, then our focus must be on CO2 more broadly, not just curtailing the use of fossil fuels," Gordon wrote in the introduction of his Western Governors Association Decarbonizing the West report last year. Yeah, not just curtailing the use of fossil fuels, which logically means it does include that. But that's Governor Gordon, and he's obviously a true believer in all this climate change nonsense. But what about the Wyoming Legislature? The bill that was mentioned in the Wildpile article was from 2020, but there was another one related to carbon capture and sequestration in 2022. That one was Senate File 47, and it was entitled Carbon Storage and Sequestration Liability. It was sponsored by the Minerals Committee, and at the time, the chairman of the House Minerals Committee was Representative Mike Greer from Washakie County. Here is what he said during the debate on the House floor. You just wait until I get to the end of this thing. It's going to blow your mind. On the one hand, he says he's been working his entire career for carbon capture and sequestration. And then at the end, well, I'll just let you listen to it. But here's the beginning, and we'll do a little stop and start because there's quite a bit of stuff to unpack here.
Here's the problem with this. Hasn't been done. So that's why the at least 20. And if the formation, if the plume of CO2 is not stable, then I would hope that the department that regulates our environment would say, no, you're not ready.
Now, hold on just a second. You're passing laws that mandate liability with regard to carbon capture and sequestration, and you admit that you don't know what's going to happen. If the formation is unstable, then we'll let the DEQ handle it. That's ridiculous. We don't mandate policy about things that we don't know about. It's probably a good thing that I had to wait to produce this episode. I would have woke up the entire neighborhood this morning. Anyway, let's continue. On second thought, no. Let's take a break. We'll continue with the program in just a second, but first, an absolutely outrageous exposition of private capitalism. You hear that, Mike Greer? Private, not government. Today's cranial explosion-inducing installment of Cowboy State Politics is brought to you by Morton Buildings. We are smack dab in one of Wyoming's 2 seasons, construction, which means if you've been thinking about a building for your property, you need to get on the stick, my friends, and call Nick and Jesse at Morton Buildings. Their phone number is 307-674-2532. They are the experts in metal building construction. They've been doing it longer than anybody else around, and they do a much better job. Their phone number is 307-674-2532. You'll receive a 50-year warranty on the foundation, which is something that you don't get from any of their competitors. One cool thing they do is they pour concrete pillars and then insert steel I-beams inside them. That way, there's no possibility of water getting underneath your building and ruining the foundation. For more information, again, call Nick and Jesse at 307-674-2532, or you can check them out at their website, mortonbuildings.com.
Here at U.S. Coin Capital, we hear from Americans across the United States who have a growing concern about the future purchasing power of U.S. paper money. Many Americans are looking for an alternative for long-term capital. For more than 35 years, the people at U.S. Coin Capital have educated American investors on how to properly accumulate United States gold and silver coins. Call us at 1-800-878-2646 or visit us on the web, uscoincapital.com.
Some say standing up for what you believe in is being extreme. Ask any woman in Wyoming. They'll tell you this is called courage. The mainstream media claims that holding the line on important issues is being unreasonable. My mom taught me this is called staying true to our principles. In other places, people argue you always have to compromise to get something done. Here in Wyoming, we know that some things are worth protecting at all costs. Some say it's time we give up on the values that made our state great to accommodate toxic culture. I say it's time to stand tall and protect the values that have served Wyoming well for over 134 years. Join Honor Wyoming as we defend and preserve the Wyoming way of life. Find out how you can make a difference today.
Visit honorwyoming.org. Make sure that you subscribe and follow Cowboy State Politics. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. And do me a favor. After you listen to every episode of Cowboy State Politics, leave me a rating. It helps keep the show at the top of all those algorithm thingies. I'd really appreciate it if you could do that for me. And now, back to the program. Here's the next part of what Mike Greer is saying, that they're going to set up a, quote, regulatory scheme to encourage businesses to participate in this mess. In government speak, encourage means force. Listen.
So that's why that discretion is there. I would suspect, and I sincerely hope, because I've spent a great deal of my career pushing forward carbon capture, or CCUS in total. I would hope that in the very near future that we will start to see this, and it may very well be the case that we come back and say, hey, once this is injected in these formations, we start to see crystallization formation and it sets up, and we can modify those rules. I've heard things from geologists all over the board on this, but the simple answer is we're trying to set a stake in the ground with a regulatory scheme that will encourage this activity.
Stop! Now, you already said that you don't know if this is going to work. And now he admits that he's trying to set up a regulatory scheme to push companies into participating in something that you have no idea whether it's going to work or not. A regulatory scheme. This is the classic government shove to force companies to do something that may not be economically feasible for them to do. But because you're in the government, you can force them to do it. Oh, and did I mention that Representative Mike Greer is a Republican? And he's a Republican that is in the leadership of the Washakie County GOP. Great, huh?
Which I think most everybody here agrees with. And that until we do it, till we know exactly what's going to happen, take the safer route in terms of doing this. This is a thing I come back to again. I said this earlier, but just keep in mind, if this just went to the wild, wild west, we'd end up needing a $50 million appropriation, quite possibly for cleanup. But as we do this with the fee and with this clear monitoring and this understanding, we should be in a good position to be able to deal with it if a problem arises.
If a problem arises. Again, he's creating regulations to force businesses, private businesses, to do something that even he doesn't know what's going to happen. There's a reason why I don't use this soundbite very often. It makes my head want to explode. Here's the end of it. You're going to love this.
Again, I still take the position of, oh, well, some CO2 got into the atmosphere. I just expended a whole lot here this afternoon.
Wait a minute. If something happens and all of the CO2 that you've pumped underneath ground escapes into the atmosphere, you don't really care anyway, which means this has nothing to do with the environment. It is all about money that they can siphon away from private businesses. One more time. Thank God we have President Trump to put a stop to all of this political garbage, or dare I use the highly technical term of cowboy state politics, bullcrap. Huge, giant, steaming piles of it. Anyway, my friends, all of this carbon capture and sequestration stuff is fantasy. It's a boondoggle created to generate money for other parties that are not named you. Well, that'll do it for today's installment of the program. I've got to go find a roll of duct tape so I don't have to go hunt down pieces of my skull later. Have a good week, and we'll talk again on Wednesday, where I'll have a great interview with Representative Trey Sherwood, the only real Democrat that's been on cowboy state politics. It's a great conversation, and I know that you're going to like it. But for now, my friends, from the base of the Bighorns, at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.